This video is my attempt to understand the mechanism behind Jesus' incarnation, how he had a divine nature and a human nature at the same time. So here it is. There are a few questions that needed to be answered. First, how did Jesus have a divine soul and a human soul? Second, how did Jesus have a divine mind and a human mind? Third, how did Jesus have a divine will and a human will? And lastly, how was Jesus like human in every way? The first is where my one soul and three minds models helps clarify, and I briefly explained it in my previous video. Jesus has a divine soul which is immutable. He took on flesh by creating a human body for himself and all of the other human attributes and going into that body. Since the biblical idea of a soul is the whole person himself, Jesus' human soul is his divine soul plus all the human attributes he created. His human soul is mutable because of the mutable attributes from his human nature. However, this doesn't mean that Jesus' divine soul is mutable, though. To think because of his human soul, his divine soul is also mutable would be committing the fallacy of division. It is because of the human attributes being able to change that his human soul can change, despite the divine soul being impossible to change. A human has one soul, one mind, one will, and one body. Humans are limited temporally and spatially. Humans also have their awarenesses limited. Humans are mutable, they grow and develop physically and mentally. Now, let's see if Jesus was indeed like human in every way. First, Jesus was indeed limited temporally as his incarnation was not timeless. In Mark 13:32, we see that Jesus is indeed limited temporally since he cannot see the end days. Second, Jesus was limited spatially since he had to physically go to places. Third, his awareness was limited by his five senses. So these verses show that he was like human, but now, for the most important part, how did Jesus become human? How could he have a divine and human nature at the same time? How could he have both a divine mind and a human mind, a divine will and a human will at the same time? The answer is it is in the brain. First of all, brains are extremely important for humans. The brain is how we interact with the world. The brain is how we process the information that comes to us as stimuli. The brain is how we output information from our minds. It cannot be stressed enough how important of a role the brain has for our human experience. Our minds get to feel emotions due to neurotransmitters and other hormones in our brains. It is so important that our minds, while alive, cannot feel anything without the brain. Under general anesthesia, brain activities related to consciousness, memory formation, sensory perception, emotional response, they're all suppressed. This shows that our brains are really important for our human experience. Just how important is our brain for taking information from the world? A very good demonstration of it is in synaptic pruning. Because of the brain's design for efficiency, any stimulus that is not present during early stages of development has the brain pruned the abilities to perceive the stimulus. In a 1960 study, kittens were raised in environments with only vertical or horizontal lines. Those exposed only to vertical lines couldn't later perceive horizontal ones and would walk into horizontal bars. Output is also brain dependent. Brain conditions affect how people act. Psychopathology shows us how damage to the brain can alter behavior dramatically. Phineas Gage, for example, became impulsive and emotionally unstable after a brain injury, despite being kind and responsible before. The brain clearly governs part of the personality and function. Thus, the brain has a direct causal relationship with the mind. It enables interaction with the world and limits how the mind functions and develops. This stands against Gnostic ideas that the body is bad. Christianity affirms the goodness and importance of the body. We will have physical bodies after the resurrection. I suspect this is because our mind need that physical interface. Now, back to Jesus. Jesus had a created, limited brain just like we do. This is significant. As humans, our brains limit our minds during development. Children can't think abstractly until their brains mature. Even object permanence and theory of mind require certain stages of development. Children cannot think beyond their brains, which would be true for Jesus as well. In Luke 2:52, it says, "And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men." How could Jesus grow in wisdom if he is God? Because his divine mind was expressed through a human brain that had to grow. That's why the verse mentions both wisdom and stature. They are connected. His brain's development allowed his mind to express more wisdom. Just like us, Jesus experienced developmental stages. He would have felt the same frustrations and limits we do. For example, my baby used to get really frustrated with not being able to precisely use her index finger and her thumb to set up a miniature table the way she wanted to. She would knock over plates while placing the forks, and she would get so angry. It was all because of her brain not being developed enough for her hand eye coordination to have developed enough. And since Jesus had a human brain, while he was a child, he couldn't have been able to think complexly enough to be wise like he was when he was an adult. Jesus experienced emotions through the same neurochemical systems as us: joy, anger, grief, not in pretense, but as real physiological states generated by a human brain. Just like humans, Jesus' brain was fully human, so his divine mind experienced everything a human would through the limitations of the brain. So, to wrap up the mind segment, Jesus had an immutable divine mind that experienced and interacted with the world through a limited brain. The limitation is important because that is what made him fully human. Now, please take note of this extremely important fact. Jesus was indeed limited by the brain, but this does not mean that Jesus ceased to be fully God. Since God is perfect, he is perfectly logical. Therefore, he cannot contradict himself, which means he cannot lose his divinity. In fact, it would be impossible for Jesus to stop being God because his divine nature is immutable. Although Jesus wasn't just acting like he was limited, he did do it voluntarily. He most likely limited himself for the mission. If he wasn't fully human, it would have made his mission moot. Now, onto Jesus' human will. Jesus' human will was divine will working through a human brain, one designed to instinctively recoil from pain, death, and suffering. As shown in Gethsemane, he dreaded the cross. His divine will was to save humanity, but his brain would have been releasing intense stress hormones in anticipation of what was coming. Because of those human neurological responses, he experienced a real desire to escape, which stood in tension with his divine purpose. Yet, this does not mean his human will was merely survival instinct. Rather, his human will was the divine will truly expressed through a human brain, producing a fully humanized and obedient expression of the eternal plan. Jesus would have experienced a full human experience through his human brain. This means Jesus wasn't just acting like he was limited and frail like a human, but the limitation was real. Add on top of that the physical limitation of his body as well, and the pain, hunger, mental fatigue, and physical fatigue, he felt firsthand the full human experience. So, was Jesus fully human? Yes. How much more can someone be a human being living and developing as a human with real limitations? Now, some people want mystery when it comes to their belief. Perhaps explaining the mechanism behind certain things make God seem less powerful, like we have a grasp on him or something. However, that cannot be further from the truth. With this explanation, we have removed mysticism in areas where it doesn't really need a mysticism. Instead, now the true mystery remains, and new, deeper mysteries can intrigue us now. We are left with the impossible to understand immutability and timelessness of God. Like, how does it even feel like to be timeless? Another mystery is how Jesus became human. The all powerful God taking on flesh sounds impossible, since it should be. Think about it. How did the all powerful God, who not even the whole heavens can contain, enter into a single physical body with a physical brain? This means that becoming human didn't make Jesus weak. It is the opposite. He was able to come into this universe because he is infinitely powerful. He actually limited himself to become a baby and then grow up among humans. and then save humans from inside the universe. That is a huge mystery and makes Jesus amazing. So I hope you enjoyed my video. Do you think this idea is good or do you think it should be scrapped? Leave a comment about it. And if you enjoyed my video, please subscribe and hit that like button. Bye bye.